People who grew up in foster care, what's the creepiest thing you experienced? I spent a large part of my childhood moving through the foster care system. I entered it when I was 4 years old and stayed there until I turned 16. Looking back now, those years shaped almost every part of who I became. Some things healed with time, but other things never really went away. I was never a difficult kid. I was not the kind of child who caused problems or tried to make things harder for the people around me. The truth was that I was just a scared kid, dealing with severe anxiety, heavy trauma from my biological family, and the painful experiences I had already gone through in other foster homes. Because I was quiet, withdrawn, and struggled to connect with people, I ended up being moved from place to place more times than I can even remember. Every time I arrived somewhere new, I was expected to adapt quickly, trust complete strangers, and feel safe in an unfamiliar house. But after enough moves, you start learning not to get too comfortable. You start expecting things to break down. One of the homes that stayed with me the most was the place I was sent to when I was 11 years old. They were a very strict, highly religious family. At first, I did not know what to think. They seemed organized and had a clear idea of how they wanted their household to run. But very quickly I realized that living there meant following their rules in every single part of my life. They expected me to attend church youth groups 3 times a week and pray with them twice every single day. If I hesitated or questioned anything, I would instantly lose basic privileges, and things that most kids consider normal were taken away from me. One of those things was having my own clothes in my room. Some weeks were so strict that I only had my school uniform and one extra change of clothes. At 11 years old, I had zero control over my life, so when I found a small way to make things better for myself, it felt extremely important. I started saving part of my lunch money. Instead of buying food, I saved enough to buy clothes from local second-hand thrift stores. They were not expensive or special, but they were mine. Having more than one outfit made me feel like I could finally blend in with everyone else. I knew they would never approve, so I hid the extra clothes underneath my bed, believing I had found a tiny piece of privacy that belonged only to me. When my foster mother found them, she did not just take the clothes away, she took my bed too. Her logic was that if I did not have a bed, I would not have anywhere to hide anything, so from that point on, I slept on a thin mattress on the floor. Not long after that, I made another mistake. I hid some Easter chocolate under the edge of the mattress to save for later. When they found it, the mattress was taken away as well and given to their dog. After that, I slept on a thin yoga mat on the floor with a single blanket, and that became my normal reality for years. It was not just about losing the bed. It was about feeling like I had no space that was truly mine, nowhere to keep something without worrying it would vanish. Going to church with them was unbearable because it was in a wealthy area where all the other kids wore expensive brand name clothes, and there I was, wearing the exact same worn-out outfits over and over. I felt like everyone could see right through me, knowing I was the poor foster kid who did not belong. The anxiety was so overwhelming that I would hide in the girls' restroom, struggling to breathe, and trying to calm my racing heart while sitting on the floor. When I started begging not to go, they saw my terror as pure disobedience and would physically force me into their car while I was crying, screaming, and resisting. One time, a social worker was standing right at the bottom of the driveway while they physically forced me into the vehicle. Even with an official standing right there, I felt completely powerless. My voice meant absolutely nothing. One day, while they were forcing me into the car, the pressure became too much and I finally snapped. I shouted at them and asked what was wrong with them. They took me back inside into my room, where I curled up on the floor, making myself as small as possible to protect myself from their rage. I remember the sheer, overwhelming terror of not being able to pull air into my lungs, feeling utterly trapped inside a nightmare I could not escape. My chest tightened. Everything went completely dark, and when I woke up on the floor, she was still standing over me. Instead of asking if I was okay after losing consciousness, she told me she did not appreciate my dramatic behavior, and that it would not change a thing. As a further punishment, I was separated from the family during meals for the next 2 weeks, forced to eat a plain sandwich alone in another room while they had normal family dinners together. They never tried to understand me or ask what I needed. They just wanted to make sure I knew I was wrong. I am 25 now. Those people moved on, lived their lives, and have their own child now. It is still hard to process knowing that the people who caused so much damage were able to continue living normally and become parents, while I am still healing the scared child inside me who did not need perfection, but just needed someone to believe her. Cultural note: under the U.S. foster care system, regulated by state child protective services, enforcing extreme deprivation such as stripping a minor of basic bedding, proper clothing, or adequate meals constitutes recognized physical and psychological neglect under state welfare codes. Administrative mandates require social workers to conduct private, unannounced welfare assessments to detect compliance-based abuse, particularly in high-control or religiously restrictive households. I have so many stories I could share, but the system has been such a massive obstacle to moving on in life because of the daily nightmares and mental instability it left behind. I hated every single part of it with every ounce of my being, though it also taught me hard lessons about survival. My worst experience happened when a 4-year-old foster sibling physically dragged me by my hair across the living room carpet. She left me with severe carpet burns all across my back and a bald spot that lasted for a couple of years. I was only 8 years old at the time and extremely frail. I was starving inside that home and regularly begged for extra portions at school just to have enough energy to stay awake during class. This little girl dragged me roughly 14 feet across the floor, while none of her older siblings or our foster mother raised a finger to stop her. Those severe friction burns across my skin remained inflamed for years. It was so red and painful that I had to secretly apply medicine when the adults were out of the house or asleep, because I was never taken to a medical doctor. I actively hid my injuries to avoid drawing attention to the scalding pain that lasted for days on end. I could not defend myself during that incident despite being older, because if I even brushed against my foster parents' favorite child, I was denied food and sleep as punishment. They would force me to write pages upon pages of promises not to touch her, cramping my hand until it went completely numb before allowing me to lie down. I remember once being locked outside in their small backyard for hours with zero way back inside. I was so severely depressed as a child that even after they unlocked the door, I just kept walking in circles in the dirt, dragging what little strength I had left just to keep myself sane. In that home, the adults kept the state funds entirely for themselves, offering us bare necessities only once in a blue moon. There are so many other painful realities from those years. My older brother got caught up in street gangs just to escape being inside that house. My older sister became a mother at 16. My younger sister went completely silent for years, and my baby brother suffered severe malnutrition during his earliest years. I started reading books constantly just to escape the nightmare of not having a safe home. I felt like I had no personal identity. That trauma stays with me even now, 10 years later. Whenever I think about it, I wonder why our assigned social worker never believed a single word we said. The one person who was supposed to protect us seemed completely blind to my pleas, brushing me off as a troubled child seeking attention. The system robbed me of my childhood, my culture, and a safe family net to fall back on when things fell apart. When we were finally reunited years later, the damage was already done. By 11, I was helping care for a newborn niece while we were all malnourished, and over time, my siblings and I grew distant. I have not spoken to my older siblings in 7 months. I am still healing little by little, I have a supportive partner, a caring mother, and a therapist helping me move past those thorns. I am slowly realizing that life does improve, even though I still deal with difficult memories that keep me up at night. Writing. This is my way of bringing awareness to an invisible struggle that thousands of children face every single day, daily tragedies that drive up gang involvement and youth instability because of negligent foster parents and a total lack of accountability. I appreciate anyone willing to listen to this story because for many of us these experiences never truly leave, but we keep trying to overcome them every day. Cultural note. Child welfare oversight frameworks under the U.S. Administration for Children and Families mandate regular casework evaluations and medical health checks for youth in state care. Systemic caseload overburdens among social workers historically led to unaddressed reports of severe neglect and physical harm, prompting federal legislative reforms focused on independent advocacy and enhanced oversight for foster youth well-being. I was a part of the NC foster care system pretty much my entire childhood. It's been one of the most brutal experiences of my life, and oddly one of the biggest blessings. My bio mom was very poor and wrote bad checks to feed us, and her parents refused to offer any sort of financial help because 2 of her kids were half black. Welp. When the law caught up with Mom, her parents took custody of my all-white sister, but my other sister and I were sent into foster care. I was 2 and she was 3. Welcome to the South of the 90s. The social services office promised that my sister and I would stay together and never lose contact with each other. That promise lasted about 2 years. After that, she was one of the lucky ones and was adopted into a permanent family. We grew up in a small town, so every now and then I'd still catch glimpses of her life and briefly meet the family that had become hers. Meanwhile, I spent the next 11 years being moved through 23 different foster homes across North Carolina. Not all of them were safe. In 4 of those homes, the adults who were supposed to protect me crossed lines that no child should ever have to face. The worst of them was a man in his 20s or 30s who still lived with his mother. In that home, I was barely given anything to eat over the weekends. The environment was completely unsafe, and as a first grader, I spent those months in a constant state of fear and confusion, knowing something was deeply wrong, but not having the words to explain it. I was in that house for about 6 months before authorities finally stepped in and removed the man from the home. Because this was the second time I had been failed in that way, the system decided I should only be placed in homes where I was the only child. On paper, it sounded like a safeguard. In reality, it was a promise that was never kept. I continued to be placed in homes with older men, and before long, I found myself living through the same kind of betrayal all over again. You know what they don't tell you is how graceless the transitions are from one home to another. Many times I would only know I was leaving a family because my social worker shows up, or maybe I come home and my bags are packed for me. I remember being in the 2nd grade and one of my family transitions was simply done at school. Old foster mom dropped me off at school, and new foster mom picked me up after school. I'll never forget getting into a red Toyota and just plopping down on the seat and obliviously saying, "Hi Mom, where do we live?" She cried the entire trip to my new home. I liked that family. By the time I reached 3rd grade, I had already developed habits that adults labeled as problem behavior. Food insecurity had me hiding food wherever I could, and once again I found myself in another home where the adults who were supposed to protect me failed me in ways no child should experience. Instead of asking why those patterns kept repeating, the system decided to move me once again. Their solution was an all-boys group home filled with older kids carrying serious behavioral problems and histories of violence. Looking back, I still can't understand how anyone thought that was the right place for a child like me. The rest speaks for itself. Ironically, I got to skip 3rd grade. Another 15 or so homes later, my social worker tells me that she's found the perfect place for me in a home with my sister. I was so excited, and a few days before Christmas the year I turned 13, I was officially adopted. Seeing my sister and passing all these years, I'd grown jealous of her and her new family. They'd always take trips, and they had a nice house. The mom drove a really nice minivan. It was hash goals to my sheltered brain. But when I moved in, I realized the grass isn't always greener on the other side. This was an all-black family, and as if coming full circle, my sister and I were abused because we were half white. Life inside that house revolved around fear. Every day felt like walking on eggshells, never knowing what small mistake might be enough to set everything off. There was an old wooden baseball bat that seemed to have a permanent place in the house. You didn't have to see it used very many times before simply catching sight of it was enough to make your stomach sink. The words hurt just as much. We were constantly reminded that we were worthless, that we would never become anything, and that we were destined to end up exactly like our biological mother. After hearing those things for years, you eventually stop arguing with them and start believing them. Home, school, church, that was the entire world we were allowed to have. Friendships never lasted. Whenever I got close to someone at school, she would make sure their parents only heard the worst possible version of me. Before long, those friendships disappeared too, until isolation simply became another part of everyday life. Let me be clear. This woman abused all of her children, black or not. But my sister and I got the blunt end of it all. We were convinced that we had a million mental issues and that we couldn't live without this woman. And also let me clarify that none of the money she was getting was going toward us. I stopped getting new clothes in the 7th grade, and so did all of my foster siblings. The money was spent on her taking vacations with her boyfriend and cruises with her church. Looking back now, I realize she knew exactly how to work the system. She understood every rule, every benefit, every loophole, and somehow managed to turn them all into something that worked in her favor. She never held a job, yet we lived in a brand new house with 2 new cars sitting in the driveway. The support she received for taking us in never seemed to be enough. As time went on, it felt as if every child in that house needed to have a diagnosis attached to their name. The more broken we appeared on paper, the more the system seemed to believe we needed help. Before long, I was convinced there was something fundamentally wrong with me. I went from doctor's appointments to medications, from medications to medical procedures, trusting every step because I was just a kid, and the adults around me insisted it was necessary. Years later, I learned a truth that completely changed how I look back on my childhood. I had spent years being forced into treatments for a neurological condition I never actually had. She managed to manipulate the paperwork to register my sister and me as academically impaired just to claim extra checks from the state. I genuinely believed I wasn't smart for so many years until I moved away, took a standardized test, and realized I was actually remarkably intelligent. I was the youngest of the family, and by far got the worst abuse. The closer I got to 18, the worse it became, and one day it clicked. She's losing money now because we're all becoming adults. The deepest wound she left me wasn't physical. It was convincing me that I wasn't capable of building a future for myself. By the time I graduated from high school, I genuinely believed I wasn't smart enough for college. I'd applied to countless schools and scholarships, but months went by without a single reply. Eventually, I stopped hoping. I got a job at Wendy's instead, walking 3 miles to work, and another 3 back every day. Every other paycheck, she would take almost everything I had earned and hand me $20 as if she were doing me a favor. Later that year, while taking out the trash, something caught my attention. Buried inside the garbage was a stack of unopened envelopes with my name on them. I pulled them out one by one. Every single envelope came from a college. As I kept reading, the reality slowly sank in. I hadn't been ignored. I hadn't been rejected. Over the previous 3 years, I had been accepted into 3 different colleges, and had even earned 2 full scholarships. I had never known they existed because the letters had never made it to me. By the time I found them, every opportunity had already slipped away. For years, I believed I wasn't good enough. The truth was far more painful. I had never been given the chance to find out what I was capable of. One last thing about this home after turning 18. I wasn't allowed to be in her house if she wasn't there, so countless nights were spent sleeping on her front porch because she was out on vacation. The fall of 2008, she visited family for Thanksgiving, and I was told not to come inside her house while she's gone. I can't tell if it was fate, a miracle, or just dumb luck, but as I'm walking the streets homeless on Thanksgiving Day, a car slams on brakes in front of me. The woman in the car stares at me blankly for what feels like 2 straight minutes, and then bursts into uncontrollable sobbing and tears. My long-lost sister recognized me from an old picture, and just happened to be on the same road as me at the same time. She put me in her car, and we spent the next few days meeting long-lost family members, including my bio mom. Then we went back and rescued my other sister. Like I said before, foster care was a blessing and a curse. My bio family didn't have the most growing up, and even though my sister got to stay with them, it was not peaches and cream. My family has a lot of addiction and poverty issues. I had to deal with a lot of hardships, but I am so well versed in life. Over the course of 23 homes, I practiced Christianity, Buddhism, Judaism, and Islam. I lived with black families, white families, Asian families. I lived with a lesbian couple, an elderly couple, and I met people all across the great state of North Carolina that I still connect with today. And all of that was by the age of 13. It's true that hardships build character, because today I am one of the most accepting, loving, and giving people I know. My life is much better now. I ended up in the Pacific Northwest, and I have a very comfortable tech job, and live in a fancy downtown high-rise with my partner and 2 babies. I'm closing on a house in a few weeks, and I'll be moving my bio family here across the country in 15 days to help them get their lives together like I did. Some stories have happy endings. Cultural note. Under the U.S. foster care system, regulated by Title IV-E of the Social Security Act, state agencies administer monthly foster care maintenance payments and adoption assistance subsidies intended for the child's basic needs and medical coverage. Unscrupulous guardians historically exploited administrative gaps and special needs classification benefits for personal financial gain, leading to the enactment of stricter federal oversight through the Child and Family Services Reviews. Like what you see? Subscribe to the Reddit Oracle for more. I was never in the foster system myself, but my best friend's daughter and son were dragged through it. The entire situation was awful and made me severely question social services in Finland. People often assume system workers are always acting in good faith, but they are just human, and sometimes they abuse their power. Years ago, my friend was trapped with a violent partner. We are talking about someone who physically assaulted her and subjected her to severe abuse on a regular basis. When she had her daughter, whom she loved more than anything, she started planning her escape. She needed help, not punishment. Instead of protecting her or placing her in a safe shelter, social workers told her that if her abusive ex kept harassing her, they would seize her children. When he continued pursuing her, the state carried out their threat and took her kids away. They gave her a list of strict demands to regain custody. She completed every single requirement. She secured her own apartment, completed therapy, finished her degree, and got a stable job. Her children, around 3 and 4 years old at the time, were initially placed with a wonderful foster couple who actively encouraged family bonding. They invited my friend to holiday events, gave her extra time with her children, and provided a safe environment. The kids adored them. However, when kindergarten teachers noticed her daughter had mild developmental delays, the assigned social worker made a sudden decision. Despite the first foster couple fighting to keep them to avoid disrupting the children's stability, the caseworker forced a transfer to a different household that supposedly had more specialized experience. That second home turned out to be a nightmare. The new foster parents already had 2 biological children and 1 foster child. The moment the kids arrived, the new foster mother ordered them to call her and her husband Mom and Dad, telling them their real mother was just a distant acquaintance named Anna. They confiscated toys given to them by their biological mother and began restricting visits, claiming they needed the time for family vacations. They intentionally forgot to invite my friend to school meetings, birthdays, and medical appointments. My friend finally hired a private attorney. When her lawyer reviewed the official social service records, they found pages of fabricated reports. The caseworker had filed reports claiming my friend was emotionally unstable, unable to maintain employment, and unfit to study. It was complete fabrication from start to finish. When the second foster mother learned a lawyer was involved, she threw a scene on my friend's front lawn in front of neighbors, screaming that no one was going to take her babies away. To make matters worse, my friend discovered the agency was allowing her violent ex unsupervised visits with the children. The turning point finally came when the original caseworker transferred to another district. The replacement social worker was professional and immediately prioritized family reunification. Overnight visits were restored. During one stay, my friend noticed her daughter acting strange. The kids revealed that whenever they returned from visiting their biological mom, the foster family confiscated their toys as punishment and forced them to strip off their clothes, claiming their mother was dirty. My friend is actually one of the cleanest, most organized people I know. Her son also revealed that the foster parents forbade them from crying or mentioning their previous foster couple, while taking gifts sent by the original couple and giving them to their own biological children. There is finally light at the end of the tunnel. Her lawyer secured supervised-only visits for the ex, and formal proceedings are underway to bring her kids home permanently. Her children are 5 and 6 now, and while my friend worries about the psychological scars left by those years, she is finally getting her family back. Cultural note: under European child welfare frameworks, including Finland's Child Welfare Act, state intervention emphasizes the primary goal of family reunification whenever a biological parent fulfills court-mandated rehabilitation steps. Municipal social agencies face strict legal oversight regarding foster home placements, and falsification of administrative reports or unproven parental unfitness claims represent severe statutory violations subject to judicial appeal and independent legal review. I spent most of my childhood moving through the foster care system. From the age of 4 until I was 16, I lived in a world where almost nothing stayed the same for long. Looking back now, I realize those years shaped almost every part of who I became. Some memories have faded with time. Others are still so clear that it feels like they happened yesterday. The hardest part is that my childhood doesn't feel like one continuous story. It feels like a collection of places, different houses, different people, and different rules. And a constant question I carried everywhere: how long am I going to be here? Everything changed when my biological father was arrested for serious crimes. Overnight, the life I knew disappeared. I went from having a normal childhood to a completely different reality, where decisions were being made around me, but never explained to me. From that moment on, uncertainty became something I learned to live with. During my first years in foster care, we rarely stayed anywhere long enough to feel settled. Sometimes we would arrive somewhere new and barely have time to understand the house before we were moved again. There were times when we left after only a few days. Other times, we stayed longer. But even when things seemed okay, there was always a part of me waiting for the next change. As a child, you don't really understand how the system works. You just learn patterns. You learn that adults can make decisions that completely change your life without asking what you want. You learn not to get too attached because the place that feels like home today might be gone tomorrow. There is one house from those years that has stayed with me more than any other. Not because it was the worst place I ever experienced, but because the first impression was so different from what came after. We arrived there in the middle of the night. When we walked inside, everything looked normal. The living room was clean, the furniture was organized, and there was an old television and a small coffee table. For a moment, I thought maybe we had finally ended up somewhere safe. But as time passed, small things started to feel different. The house didn't feel like a family home. It felt more like a place designed around managing a large number of children. There were many kids living there. The routines were strict, and the expectations were clear. We spent a lot of time in one room, and the main rule was simple. Don't cause problems, don't make too much noise, and don't draw attention. At first, we were just children trying to understand the rules, but eventually, we adapted. Kids are incredibly good at adapting when they don't have another choice. We learned what was allowed and what wasn't. We learned when it was better to stay quiet. Over time, we even found ways to communicate without drawing attention, writing notes to each other. Looking back, that is one of the saddest things about that time. We were children, but we were already learning how to make ourselves smaller. Every morning we were allowed outside for a short period of time for recess. There wasn't much there, just a small area where we could move around and forget about everything for a little while, but that short time outside felt completely different. For a brief moment, we weren't thinking about rules, or whether we were doing something wrong. We were just kids. Then about a week later, it happened again. We were told we were leaving. No long explanation, no real goodbye, just another move to another unfamiliar place. At the time, I didn't understand why that happened so often, only that every time I started feeling comfortable somewhere, I had to leave. But as strange as it sounds, not every memory from foster care is painful. There were moments when we met people who genuinely cared, and those moments mattered. One of those people was a foster mother who had 2 children of her own. From the beginning, she treated us differently, not like a responsibility or a problem to manage, but like we belonged there. For the first time in years, I experienced something I had almost forgotten existed: stability. We stayed with her for about 2 months. To most people, that might not sound like a long time, but when your entire life is measured in short stays and sudden changes, 2 months can feel enormous. She owned a small restaurant, and during the week, we would sometimes spend time there while she worked. Before opening, she would let us help with simple tasks, wrapping silverware and organizing things. Those small jobs made me feel useful, like I had a place. I wasn't just another child being moved around. I was someone who could contribute, and someone who mattered. That was also the year I celebrated a birthday in a way I never had before. She gave me my first birthday present, an old Spider-Man lunchbox with a coloring book and crayons inside. It wasn't expensive or special to most people, but to me, it was everything. I carried that lunchbox everywhere, and that was when Spider-Man became my favorite hero. Not because of the character itself, but because that small gift represented something much bigger for once. Someone had thought about me and wanted me to feel special. That house was the closest I had felt to having a normal childhood. And maybe that's why what happened next was so difficult. Because once again, just when I started believing I could stay somewhere safe, everything changed. We were placed in the home of a woman everyone called Mima. At first, it seemed like we had finally been lucky. She lived in a large 2-story house, bought us things, and treated us kindly. After years of moving from place to place, it felt almost impossible to believe that we might finally have somewhere permanent. Those first weeks felt like hope, and when you spent your childhood losing everything, hope becomes something incredibly powerful. But slowly, the atmosphere in the house began to change gradually. The kindness disappeared little by little, and the house became a place where we were constantly trying to avoid making mistakes. We learned to pay attention to everything: the mood of the adults, the tone of someone's voice, and the smallest changes in the environment. We weren't allowed much contact with the outside world, and that isolation made it feel like the world beyond those walls was getting farther away. Every month, someone from the system would come to check on us for official visits, but the reality was that we never felt safe enough to explain what was actually happening, fearing what would happen after the visit ended. That silence followed us for years. Eventually, the house became a place where fear was part of everyday life. The rules became stricter, the consequences became harder to predict, and slowly, I stopped thinking about whether things were normal. I only thought about surviving them. The mind sometimes separates itself from things that are too painful to process all at once, so I don't remember those years as one complete story. I remember pieces, images, feelings, and a sense of constantly waiting for something to happen. For a long time, I hated myself for the way my mind worked. For me, one of the hardest parts was realizing that I carried emotions I never asked for: anger, fear, and a constant feeling that something inside me had been damaged. There were times when my own thoughts scared me, thoughts that made me question myself and afraid of what I was capable of. For years I carried shame because of that. But through therapy, I began to understand something important. A thought is not the same thing as an action, and a feeling is not the same thing as a choice. I still struggle with those thoughts sometimes, and relationships and trust were difficult because I was terrified that if people saw everything inside my head, they would only see a monster. So I learned to keep my distance and recognize when I needed professional support. Having dark thoughts does not mean someone wants to act on them sometimes. It means a person is fighting harder than anyone else can see. The hardest part of my life has been accepting that both things can be true. At the same time, I can have these thoughts and still choose not to become them. Today, I try to focus on the part of myself that I want the world to see by doing community work and helping other students when they need support, not because that erases what happened, but because I need to remind myself that the things I experienced are not the only thing that define me. Maybe being a good person isn't about never having darkness inside you. Maybe it's about what you choose to do when that darkness appears. I can't change the childhood I had or remove the memories, but every day, I can choose what I do with them. The person I became was shaped by what happened to me, but it does not have to be controlled by it. Cultural note: children who spend extended periods in high-turnover foster care environments frequently experience post-traumatic stress and dissociative mechanisms, where the brain compartmentalizes overwhelming memories as a survival strategy. Psychological support and cognitive behavioral therapy focus on helping former foster youth differentiate intrusive traumatic thoughts from actual behavioral choices, fostering long-term emotional regulation and personal agency. I was removed from my biological parents when I was just a toddler because they were deeply unfit to raise a child, and after they were arrested on severe charges, I was thrust straight into the state foster care system. My first destination was a group home facility in Reno, Nevada, called Kids Cottage. The very first thing they did was separate me from my 7-year-old brother, who was essentially my only true parent figure at the time. When we were finally moved into an actual foster home together, it belonged to a wealthy family living on a large property out in the desert. That woman subjected us to harsh discipline early and often. She forced us to do heavy physical yard labor in the brutal desert heat when we were only 5 and 7 years old. When my brother collapsed from extreme heat exhaustion, she allowed him to sit down for just 30 minutes before forcing him right back out into the sun to clean up his own mess. I developed a habit of getting up in the middle of the night to use the restroom or just wander the hallway. I like standing by the large bay windows, staring across the desert at the distant city lights of Reno. When she caught me wandering one night, she decided to put an end to it by placing a heavy wooden crib upside down over my mattress to physically trap me inside. When I accidentally wet the bed while trapped underneath, she reacted with extreme physical force and forced me into diapers. When she realized I had learned how to slide the crib off, she began taping it down securely to the bed frame. She literally turned my bed into a cage. During one desperate attempt to escape from underneath it, I was thrown against the sharp corner of my brother's bed frame. The impact almost split my forehead completely open, and I still carry a deep physical dent in my head to this day. She regularly left us without proper meals for days at a time, and when she finally fed us, it was just cold, stale food or cereal mixed with tap water instead of milk. Eventually, we were moved to my maternal aunt's house, who officially adopted us after manipulating legal paperwork regarding my biological father. That was when everything spiraled even further out of control. I was turned into unpaid forced labor around the house. I was treated like a robot, forbidden from doing anything unless given direct orders. She would strike my head with her fists, or lash out with metal coat hangers, plastic racetracks, or whatever heavy household object was within arm's reach. Once again, I went without food for days, or she would single me out and force me to eat dry, unappealing scraps. When I was 10, she removed every single personal belonging from my bedroom, leaving me with a bare mattress on the floor. I was forbidden from leaving my room for any reason without explicit permission. When I had to relieve myself in the corner out of sheer desperation, she punished me severely instead of simply granting access to the bathroom. She constantly warned me that if I ever told anyone outside what was happening, I would be separated from my siblings forever, instilling a deep fear of speaking up. Due to the continuous physical and emotional turmoil throughout my childhood, my mind fractured, and I developed dissociative identity disorder. When I finally admitted to her that I was hearing internal voices taking over my awareness, she attempted to physically break those perceptions out of me, cornering me in the kitchen and striking my head repeatedly with full strength. When I reached high school, she forcibly admitted me to a residential psychiatric facility for 6 full months just to be rid of me. When I was finally released, every piece of evidence that I had ever lived in that house had been completely destroyed. She erased my presence, forced my siblings to treat me like a distant cousin, and insisted I call her aunt instead of mom. She would regularly walk into my room just to yell at me, pull my hair, or open the windows, telling me to run away because nobody would ever want me. She even spread deeply private and humiliating fabrications about my toddler years to my entire high school class, ensuring my school life was just as hostile as my home environment. When I turned 18 and tried to access the college savings fund my uncle had set up for us, I discovered she had cleaned out the entire bank account and closed it a month prior. I survived all of it, but parts of my past remain locked away in my mind, carried by inner fragments that still refuse to speak about what happened. Cultural note: dissociative identity disorder (DID) is a complex psychiatric condition recognized in the DSM-5, typically developing in early childhood as a severe psychological coping mechanism in response to prolonged trauma, physical confinement, or extreme emotional distress. Under US family law and child welfare regulations, severe administrative failure to detect guardian financial exploitation, physical confinement, or psychological mistreatment often leads to independent state audits and federal oversight under Title IV protection frameworks. I never made it all the way into the official foster care system, but I had a horrifying experience with the agency that tried to put me and my sister there. It all started the day before I turned 15. My family had just returned home from a week of vacation. My parents were arguing, so my younger sister went over to our grandmother's house down the street to get some space. I was just sitting in front of my computer playing video games. About an hour later, I suddenly looked out the window and saw our house surrounded by police cars. My mom ran into my room in a complete panic, telling me to put on my shoes and run out the back. Scared out of my mind, I fumbled with my laces and ran toward our bike shed. Before I could even unlock my bike, 2 officers on foot spotted me. They sprinted toward me, so I panicked, squeezed through the hedge, and ran through a neighbor's garden for all I was worth. Halfway through the yard, my right shoe popped off. Realizing I could not outrun them with one bare foot, I gave up and let them lock me in the back of a police cruiser. After waiting for half an hour, an officer finally informed me that my parents had been accused of severe child abuse, specifically targeting my sister. My sister suffered from a complex chronic health condition, but she was never abused. On the contrary, my mom cared for her around the clock. My dad handed me a backpack with some essentials through the car window before they drove me away. A few streets down, they transferred me to an unmarked civilian car driven by child protective workers. They drove me to a juvenile detention facility where they locked me inside a converted isolation cell. Before they even gave me food, they forced a 15-year-old kid to sign legal paperwork accepting psychological treatment at the facility. No lawyer was present, just a social worker and a guard. I spent 2 weeks inside that unheated cell. They refused to bring me a change of clothes, and I was denied phone calls. I was forced to attend their internal facility school, where the material was an absolute joke. I actually had to trick a staff member into letting me use the office phone just to call my appointed caseworkers and beg for clean clothes. They got furious at the employee for letting me make that call. 2 weeks after my arrest, my caseworkers finally showed up to take me to the emergency displacement hearing. My parents' attorney proved 3 crucial facts to the young judge. There was zero evidence I was in danger. At 15, I was old enough to state my own wishes, and I detailed the severe confinement conditions I was subjected to. The judge ruled immediately that there was no cause to remove me, and I went home with my parents that very day. However, the agency kept hunting my sister. Sometime later, they managed to detain her for a week, holding her in a solitary room while denying her essential prescribed medications. My dad literally had to break her out of that medical facility and drive her across the border into Germany, where doctors finally stabilized her condition. If he had not done that, she would have suffered total organ failure within weeks. She lives safely in Germany today, though heavily traumatized. The entire ordeal eventually destroyed my parents' marriage. Even after enduring those 2 weeks in an isolation cell, reading what other kids experienced in the system makes me realize how lucky I actually was to escape. Cultural note: Child Protective Services (CPS) and International Youth Protection Frameworks operate under emergency removal mandates when child endangerment is alleged in several European and North American jurisdictions. Placing minors in secure detention or isolation facilities during preliminary evaluations requires strict judicial oversight. Denying prescribed medication or due process during administrative custody can constitute severe state negligence, often resulting in jurisdictional conflicts or asylum claims across international borders. If you like these stories, make sure to subscribe to the Reddit Oracle.